The snow had begun falling just after sunset, quietly blanketing the town in white as if winter itself were trying to hush the noise of everything left unsaid. Lights flickered to life in shop windows, casting golden halos onto icy sidewalks. Garlands wrapped around lampposts. Doorbells jingled as neighbors stepped into warmth, and fireplaces whispered against the cold. It was the kind of night that looked peaceful on the outside, gentle, timeless, the way only small towns seem to hold on to tradition. But for those who carried ghosts in their hearts, Christmas had a way of stirring what they thought they had buried. And for Sophia, peace had become something she built in silence, not something she expected to arrive with snow. Especially not this Christmas. Sophia moved through the evening with practiced ease, organizing, tending, giving, the kind of presence that made her seem whole to anyone watching. But inside, she was someone who had learned not to expect closure. She didn't wait for what had been lost to return. She didn't hope for rewritten endings. Years ago, that kind of hope had burned her. Now she walked with grace shaped by endurance. And it was in that quiet resilience that she built her life. Once, she had dreamed with someone else. Once, she had held hands under street lamps and talked about forever like it was something they could touch. His name was Matteo. And back then, he was everything she believed in, until the moment he chose something else. Something bigger, louder, something that didn't include her. And he left. Matteo didn't leave in anger. He left in pursuit, chasing something shiny, something that promised more than this town, more than her love ever could. She remembered how his eyes lit up when he spoke of the offer, the opportunity, the future. He said it was only temporary. He promised he'd come back. But people who chase the world often forget where they started. For a while, Sophia waited. She defended him when others judged. She whispered excuses into her own pillow, telling herself that ambition wasn't betrayal, that maybe he needed to leave to understand what truly mattered. But as months turned to years, silence became louder than promises. And eventually, she stopped listening for footsteps. She chose to stay, but not in the waiting. Now, as she stepped out into the snowy street that Christmas Eve, the air held that familiar stillness. It wrapped around her like a memory, soft, haunting, and uninvited. She paused under the glowing lights, breathing in the cold, steadying herself in the present. There was no reason to feel uneasy. He was gone. He had made his choice, and she had survived it. Elsewhere, in the shadows of the same town he once left behind, Matteo returned, not with fanfare, not with success in his hands like a trophy. He came back with something heavier, a heart full of regret and a silence too big to carry alone. He told himself it was just for a few days. Business, loose ends. But when he stepped out of the car and saw the snow falling the same way it had the night he left, something inside him cracked. This town hadn't changed much. But he had, and not in the ways he once imagined. The man who left to conquer the world now barely recognized himself in the windows he passed. Because no amount of success had quieted the truth. He had gained everything, except peace. He told himself he wouldn't seek her out, that it wouldn't matter now. She'd moved on. She had to, but deep down, he knew he didn't return only for business. He returned because Christmas has a way of calling us back, to what we left, to who we could have been. That night their paths crossed, not by plan, not by intention, but by something quieter. She saw him first, a silhouette beneath a lamppost, hands in pockets, snow dusting his shoulders. He hadn't noticed her yet, but she froze. Her breath caught. The world kept moving, but something inside her didn't. He turned slowly, and when their eyes met, time lost its meaning. There were no words, no greetings, just a shared awareness, one that carried years of absence, questions never asked, and answers neither of them owed anymore. But something between them still flickered, not like before, not love, something deeper, recognition. He nodded, as if unsure what else to do. She didn't smile, didn't frown. She just looked. And then she walked away, not coldly, but completely, because she didn't owe him anything. And he finally understood that. But Christmas doesn't just bring people home. It brings truth. It unwraps the stories we try to hide. It exposes who we've become when no one's watching. It doesn't fix what's broken. It invites us to see if we're brave enough to try. And this time, Matteo didn't want to run. He didn't come to explain. He didn't come to ask for a second chance. He came because something inside him had finally broken. Not in anger, but in understanding. All his success hadn't healed the part of him that walked away from love. And when you break in the right place, that's where redemption can begin, if you choose to stay. Sophia didn't know what his presence would stir. She only knew it had taken her years to rebuild peace, and she wouldn't trade it for anything uncertain again. But she also knew the way he looked at her was different now. Less like a man who expected something, and more like one who had lost it all, and finally saw the cost. Christmas is not about perfect reunions. It's about what happens when broken people stop pretending. When hearts soften, not for nostalgia but for truth. When staying becomes louder than leaving. And when presence says more than promises ever could. This was not a love story picking up where it left off. This was something else entirely. Sophia didn't believe in fairy tale endings anymore, but she did believe in growth. In truth. In the kind of redemption that doesn't ask for permission, just for presence. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for a beginning. Not the same love, but a new kind. Stay until the end, because this is the kind of story that reminds us, even after the wrong choice, love can return. Different, humbler, and real. Subscribe to Redeemed Hearts for more cinematic stories of second chances and quiet redemption that stays with you long after the screen fades. There was a time when love felt simple, when forever was something they talked about while sharing coffee in chipped mugs. Back then the world was small, and that was a comfort, not a limitation. Sophia and Matteo would sit on the old steps outside her porch, their knees touching, futures whispered between them like secrets. No one was rushing. Dreams felt like something they could build together, brick by brick. And the only thing they needed was each other. Matteo, even then, had a hunger in his eyes, not for escape, but for something more. More than routine, more than what the town could offer. He spoke of possibilities beyond state lines, beyond small-town ceilings. He loved Sophia deeply, but he was restless. And restlessness doesn't wait for permission. When the job offer came, a real one, out of nowhere, it felt like fate validating all the dreams he had dared to speak aloud. A startup in the city, an entry-level role with a fast path forward. It was everything he wanted, and everything Sophia feared. She smiled when he told her, but her hands trembled when he held them, because she already knew what he hadn't said yet. "I'll only be gone for a while," he promised. "We'll make this work." He believed it when he said it. And maybe she did too, for a minute. But there was a heaviness behind her eyes he didn't want to see. So he focused on the future, on the door opening wide in front of him. They spent that last week pretending not to count days. They walked slower, talked in half sentences, made love like it was a conversation they couldn't finish. And every time silence crept in, Matteo filled it with plans. For someday, for later. Sophia didn't beg him to stay, not because she didn't want to, but because she knew he would resent her if she did. So she let him believe it would all be fine, that they were strong enough, that ambition and love could hold hands. But inside, she felt something beginning to break, and she didn't have the words to stop it. The night he left, snow was falling in slow, lazy spirals. Just like this one. The town looked like a movie, too perfect for what was really happening. He hugged her tight but quick, as if dragging it out would make it harder, as if rushing made it cleaner. But nothing about goodbye is clean. He didn't cry. She didn't either. Their eyes held everything they didn't say. Regret hadn't arrived yet. Only the echo of possibility, the ache of all that could still be salvaged. At least that's what they told themselves. Matteo left with hope. Sophia stayed with silence. The distance didn't just come from geography. It came from time zones, missed calls, and messages left on read. At first they tried. Late-night phone calls, plans to visit. But slowly, love got buried under busyness. Success demanded his attention. Deadlines, meetings, networks. The world he once dreamed of swallowed him whole. And Sophia, she became something he remembered, not something he lived. She slipped from his daily routine, not with cruelty, just with neglect. She never said, "You forgot me." She just stopped reminding him. She didn't send angry texts. She didn't fight for space. Instead, she turned her energy inward, into work, into healing. The first time he forgot her birthday, he sent a gift. Expensive, late, impersonal. It arrived in a box perfectly wrapped. But she didn't even open it, because what she wanted couldn't be mailed. She wanted his presence, his voice, his attention. By the second Christmas apart, she didn't decorate. Not out of protest, out of self-preservation. She didn't want to make space for someone who wasn't coming. And she was tired of pretending that absence was temporary. So she stopped. And slowly, the grief became a kind of peace. Matteo, meanwhile, rose quickly. Titles came. Money came. He made deals, flew business class, stayed in hotels with windows too clean to reflect who he was becoming. He looked successful. He sounded confident. But at night he lay awake wondering why he felt nothing. The world had cheered for him. They called him brilliant, driven, focused, and he believed them, until the silence caught up. Until there was no one to call when the news was good. No one who knew the full story of who he used to be. He thought about calling her, many times, but he didn't know what to say. What do you say to someone you left without ever truly letting go? What do you say when your success feels like a betrayal? So he stayed quiet and told himself it was too late. But the heart has a memory, and it doesn't follow logic or timing. It stirs at inconvenient moments. And for Matteo, it stirred at Christmas, when lights went up, when snow began to fall, and when regret finally outweighed pride. That was the winter he chose money over love. The season he walked away from a woman who never asked for anything but presence. He told himself it was the right thing, the smart thing. But time has a cruel way of proving what really matters. And some lessons wait until the snow falls again, to come back around. The town didn't change when Matteo left. It didn't pause. It didn't crumble. It simply continued, the way small towns always do. Season after season, the same rhythms returned. Windows dressed in garlands, sidewalks cleared of snow by familiar hands. Sophia stayed, not because she was weak, but because she was rooted. Not in fear, not in comfort, but in choice. She stayed because her life was here. Her people were here. Her identity wasn't something she needed to escape to find. At first, his absence felt like a wound that refused to clot. She reached for her phone in the mornings, forgetting he was no longer part of her day. She'd catch herself preparing 2 mugs of coffee, setting aside thoughts for someone no longer listening. Grief is rarely loud. Most days it hums softly in the background, a quiet companion to every ordinary task. Sophia didn't let it consume her. She allowed it space, but not control. She got up each morning, opened the bookstore, spoke to neighbors, tended to small things with great care, and over time she realized she was healing, not all at once, but enough to keep walking. Matteo had once said she was too content with small things, too comfortable with just enough. He didn't mean to insult her, but he did. She remembered the sting in his voice when he said it, the way he looked past the town instead of into it. He was always reaching forward. She was always holding steady. That winter, while he was boarding planes and making deals, she was wrapping books for the community gift drive. She was staying late to organize shelves at the library, bringing soup to Mrs. Hanley down the street, lighting candles at the church before sunrise. Her life was stitched together with acts of care, nothing glamorous, but everything meaningful. She didn't fill the space he left with another relationship, not because she couldn't, but because she didn't want to confuse company with connection. She had loved once with everything she had, and now she was learning how to love herself with that same intensity, to be enough, without being someone else's priority. Meanwhile, Matteo climbed. He moved from assistant to manager, manager to director, then to something even higher. He wore tailored suits, signed contracts in conference rooms with panoramic views, and learned how to speak the language of power. People respected him, admired his drive, envied his lifestyle. He was everything he thought he wanted to be, except he didn't recognize the man in the mirror anymore. He had become someone who measured his worth in numbers, and he had no one left who saw beyond them. Sofia still came to mind, usually late at night, in quiet hotel rooms. When the noise finally settled, he'd remember the sound of her laugh, the way she'd look at him when she was half asleep, not adoring, just present. And that memory ached more than he expected. He wondered if she hated him, or worse, if she had forgotten him entirely. He wondered if someone else had replaced him, someone who didn't leave, someone who saw her value from the beginning. But he never called, because pride always speaks first. Back in the town, Sofia wasn't waiting. She was growing. She planted a garden behind the store, started writing in the mornings, learned how to fix a leaky faucet. She learned how to carry herself through loneliness without resentment, and how to enjoy peace without guilt. People noticed her strength. They admired how she showed up for others, how she always had the right words, how she listened without trying to fix. They didn't know she had learned it through breaking. They just knew her as steady, dependable, whole. She didn't speak of Matteo, not because she couldn't, but because she had given those chapters back to the wind. She no longer needed to explain who she had loved, or why he left. She wasn't defined by someone else's departure. She was shaped by her own decision to stay. Matteo, surrounded by recognition, still felt something missing. It wasn't noise. It wasn't love. It was meaning. None of his success had taught him how to sit still, how to be known without performance, how to be chosen without proving. He began to notice what he had overlooked, the empty congratulations, the echo of "well done" that faded before it reached his heart. He thought of Sofia's bookstore, of her steady hands and quiet convictions, and for the first time, he questioned everything he had built, not because it wasn't impressive, but because it wasn't enough. The people who praised him didn't know his history, didn't know who he had hurt, didn't know the version of himself he once left behind. But he did, and the weight of that knowledge was beginning to catch up, especially with Christmas approaching, especially when the lights began to go up again. She stayed. He rose. But what he had built now felt empty, without someone to share it with. And what she had built felt strong enough to stand without apology. They had become different people. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. December arrived with a hush, the kind that wrapped the town in quiet anticipation. Snow began to fall earlier than usual, gently covering rooftops and sidewalks like a soft promise. Children dragged sleds through powdered streets. Shopkeepers hung twinkling lights in frosted windows, and the town square began to glow with the warmth of routine celebration. But beneath all the tradition, something unexpected stirred. A presence returning after too long away. A name no longer spoken out loud, but never fully erased. Matteo was coming home. He didn't send a message, didn't announce his arrival. He simply showed up, driving past the same familiar corners he once thought too small to contain him. The bookstore, the diner, the church with candles flickering through stained glass. It all looked the same, but felt heavier now. The moment he stepped out of the car, the cold hit him like a memory. Not just the temperature, the stillness, the way time felt slower here, the way this town held on to things. His breath curled in the air, visible and uneven. He paused, hands in his coat pockets, unsure what to feel. Regret, yes, but something deeper too. A strange kind of longing. He told himself this trip was just to handle some property paperwork. His mother's old house needed something signed. Nothing emotional. Just business. But Matteo wasn't a man who believed in coincidence anymore. And coming back at Christmas? Even he couldn't ignore what that timing whispered. The first place he passed was the bookstore. He slowed down without meaning to. Its front window was glowing, lined with holiday lights and stacked with gift-wrapped novels. There were garlands on the door and soft music spilling faintly into the cold air. He didn't go in. Not yet. But the lump in his throat told him what he already feared. She was still here. Sophia didn't see him that day. She was busy unpacking a new shipment, her scarf tucked into her coat, cheeks red from the cold. The same quiet grace in her movements. The same attentiveness to every detail. If she felt anything stirring that day, she didn't let it show. She had become a woman who carried peace with her, and Matteo wasn't ready to disturb that. He checked into a small inn by the edge of town, one that smelled like cinnamon and old books. The woman at the desk asked his name twice, doing a double take. "Weren't you the Valdez boy?" He smiled politely. Said yes. Didn't ask what they remembered. He already knew. The next morning he wandered. Through streets he used to race through on his bike, past the old library steps where he once kissed her under falling leaves. Everything held echoes of who he used to be. But the reflection he saw in the window panes wasn't that boy anymore. He had sharp lines around his eyes now, and something hollow behind them. When he finally saw her again, it wasn't planned. He turned a corner near the community center, and there she was, carrying a box full of donated coats, hair tucked into a wool beanie, laughing at something a child had said. He stopped walking. It was instinct, as if even his legs knew he had no right to move closer. She hadn't seen him yet, and in that suspended moment, he saw her life without him, whole, beautiful in its simplicity. He felt the weight of everything he had traded for boardrooms and balance sheets, and none of it could hold a candle to the way she smiled at that child. A smile he hadn't seen in years. When their eyes finally met, it was like time folded in on itself. She froze for a second, her smile fading. Not in anger, but in shock. She blinked slowly, processing. He raised a hand in the faintest wave, not expecting anything, just acknowledging the history between them, a history too long ignored. Sophia didn't approach him. She didn't look away either. She simply nodded, once, and turned back to help someone lift another box. And just like that, the moment ended. No confrontation, no greeting, just reality. Matteo stood there for a long time after she disappeared into the building. The cold didn't bother him. His thoughts did. He had imagined seeing her again, but not like this. Not as an outsider to her world. Not as a stranger to her peace. He had expected guilt. He hadn't expected quiet. He walked slowly back to the inn, dragging memory behind him like a heavy coat. Every corner of town whispered her name. Not in longing, but in absence. Not in regret, but in distance. He had chosen to leave. And the space between them was something he had created, brick by brick, year by year. That night he couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, wondering if you could ever really return. Not physically, but emotionally. Can a person come back to where they once walked away from and become part of it again? Or does the act of leaving change you so much that return becomes impossible? He didn't know, but he was starting to ask. Sophia didn't speak of him that night. She didn't tell anyone he was back. She simply made tea, curled up by the fire, and stared out the window, not because she was shaken, but because some moments deserve reflection, not reaction, and she had learned to let truth settle before deciding what it meant. The town moved on. Christmas lights twinkled, songs played on every corner, people planned gatherings and gift drives. But beneath all the joy, something deeper stirred, a quiet tension between what had been and what might still be, and it was only just beginning. The return no one expected didn't change everything, not yet, but it opened a door that had been locked for too long, not with a key, but with a question. Would presence after all this time be enough to start again, or was he already too late? The days after Matteo's return carried a different weight. Nothing dramatic happened. No confrontation echoed through the town, but something subtle shifted in the air, as if every familiar street now held a question, as if the past had quietly stepped back into the present and refused to be ignored. Sophia felt it in the smallest moments, In the pause before opening the bookstore each morning, in the way her thoughts wandered during conversations. She wasn't shaken, she wasn't undone, but she was aware. Awareness has its own kind of gravity. She told herself she owed him nothing, no explanation, no reaction, no space in the life she had rebuilt carefully. And yet truth doesn't always ask permission. It arrives quietly and waits to be acknowledged. Matteo, on the other hand, felt surrounded by memory. Every step through town echoed with who he used to be. Every familiar corner reminded him of what he had abandoned. He wasn't nostalgic. He was confronted. There's a difference. Nostalgia softens, confrontation exposes. He passed places that once belonged to them. The diner where they shared late breakfasts, the park bench where they argued and made up, the church steps where Sophia used to sit and read. Each memory stood intact, untouched by time, waiting for him to notice what he had missed. Matteo didn't seek her out immediately, not because he lacked courage, but because he finally understood restraint. Some silences deserve respect. Some wounds need space before they can speak, and he had caused too many to rush now. This time, he waited. Their next encounter happened by circumstance, not choice. At the community center, boxes stacked high with donated coats and toys, the sound of laughter mixing with holiday music. Sophia stood near the back, organizing lists. Matteo entered quietly, unnoticed at first, until the past stepped into the room. She looked up and saw him, not startled, not defensive, just present. Her body remembered before her mind reacted. Years of shared history don't disappear. They simply wait beneath the surface. Matteo stopped when their eyes met. He didn't smile, didn't speak. He didn't want to claim familiarity he no longer had the right to. So he nodded, slowly, respectfully, an acknowledgement, not an intrusion, a gesture that surprised them both. Sophia hesitated for a moment, then returned the nod. Not in warmth, not in coldness, but in recognition. The past didn't need a scene. It only needed honesty. They stood near each other, not together, working on separate tasks, sharing the same space without sharing words. The silence between them wasn't tense. It was full, filled with things that once mattered deeply, and things that still needed answers. Matteo watched her as she moved through the room, calm, focused, grounded. This wasn't the woman he left behind. She carried herself differently now, not hardened, but strengthened. Sophia felt his presence without turning toward it. She noticed how he didn't hover, didn't force conversation, didn't make the moment about himself. That restraint unsettled her more than words would have, because it felt new and unfamiliar. Eventually, the silence spoke first. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said softly. Her voice was steady, not accusing, not inviting, just truthful. And truth, when spoken calmly, carries weight. "I didn't expect to come back like this," Matteo replied. No explanations followed, no defenses, just presence. The kind that doesn't try to fix the moment, only to stand in it. He was learning. They didn't talk long. They didn't resolve anything, and they didn't pretend this was closure. But something essential happened. The past was no longer avoided. It had been acknowledged. And acknowledgement is the first crack in silence. That evening, Sophia walked home slower than usual, not because she was unsettled, but because she was reflective. Healing, she realized, didn't mean forgetting. It meant facing memory without being controlled by it. And today she had done exactly that, on her own terms. Matteo stood alone in the town square later that night. Snow fell gently around him. Lights glowed warmly overhead. And for the first time, he understood something clearly. The past wasn't punishing him. It was asking him to be honest, and this time he was ready to listen. Change didn't announce itself in Matteo's life. It didn't slam a door or strike lightning through the sky. It crept in slowly, disguised as stillness. It arrived in the spaces between words, in the weight of unspoken things, in the quiet that came after choosing not to explain himself. There was no epiphany, no cinematic breakdown, No grand confession. Just a growing discomfort with the man he had been, and a curiosity about the man he might still become. He began waking earlier, not because of meetings or alarms, but because something in his body stirred before the sun. He would walk through town in the dim light, his breath curling in the cold, his thoughts louder than before. The streets were still the same, but they no longer made him feel small. Now they made him feel seen, as if they had been waiting for him to finally slow down. And for the first time, he let them. He walked without purpose, just to notice. Matteo started showing up at the community center. At first, he offered vague reasons. Here to help, free hands, just passing time. No one questioned it much. People in small towns know when someone needs something deeper than they're saying. They don't press, they just make space. He carried boxes. He helped lift tables. He untangled Christmas lights with quiet focus. He didn't try to impress anyone. Didn't mention where he'd been or what he'd done. And when someone thanked him, he didn't shrug it off. He just nodded and kept going. Sophia saw it all from a distance. She noticed how he didn't hover near her, how he spoke kindly to others but gave her space, how he listened more than he spoke. He wasn't trying to make her see him. He was just there. And that, more than anything, caught her off guard. There was no apology yet, no conversation about what happened. But his presence was different now. It wasn't demanding. It didn't feel like a performance. It was steady, like someone learning how to stay. And that kind of change doesn't go unnoticed. Matteo didn't know how to explain what was happening inside him. There were no words for the slow, painful process of unlearning pride, of realizing that silence was sometimes the only honest language he had. He didn't want to speak too soon, didn't want to ask for forgiveness he hadn't earned. So he folded chairs, tied bows on donated toys, and sat in the back of the room during carol rehearsals. Present, but not central. The town received him without ceremony. A few knowing glances, some warm, cautious nods. Small towns don't forget, but they do forgive eventually when a person shows they're willing to do the slow work. Not just show up once, but stay. And Matteo stayed. Every day. He found peace in the routine, sweeping snow from the steps before others arrived, fixing a squeaky door hinge at the back of the center, carrying groceries for the elderly man on Maple Street. These weren't grand gestures, but they were consistent. And consistency, Matteo was learning, is what healing is built on. One afternoon, he was stringing lights across the ceiling when Sophia walked in. He didn't freeze, didn't speak, just kept working, hands steady, eyes focused. She didn't interrupt. She watched for a moment, then moved past him toward the storage closet. It was the most normal interaction they'd had in years. There was something sacred about those moments where nothing needed to be said, where the weight of the past was acknowledged simply by choosing to share space without tension. Sophia wasn't ready to forgive, but she wasn't angry. She was just cautious. And caution, too, is a kind of self-respect. Matteo honored that. He didn't ask how she was, didn't try to open old wounds in the name of honesty. Instead, he offered help when needed, stepped back when not, learned to read the room and her posture without asking for anything. And in that space, trust began to take root. Not as a conversation, but as a rhythm. He began to feel lighter, not because things were resolved, but because he had stopped pretending. He wasn't the man who had it all together anymore. He wasn't performing success. He was present. And presence, he realized, was a harder thing to offer than ambition ever was. Sophia began to soften imperceptibly at first. She asked him to carry a table, thanked him for fixing a light. One day she offered him a cup of tea without thinking. Small gestures, but meaningful ones. Not signs of reconciliation, signs of recognition that something had shifted. Matteo didn't expect anything from her. He no longer waited for her approval like a boy needing affirmation. He was learning to give, not to receive, but because giving was part of becoming someone better. Not louder, not more successful, just honest and grounded. People in town began talking differently around him. Not about him, but with him. They asked about his help with events, invited him to a planning meeting, trusted him to show up. And he did. Not out of obligation, but out of something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Sophia still kept a boundary between them, and he didn't cross it. But every time she walked into the room and didn't flinch, that was something. Every nod, every brief glance, every moment of shared silence that didn't hurt, that was something. Change was happening. Not in declarations, but in quiet, repetitive truth. That's how redemption begins. Not with grand apologies or sweeping gestures, but with the decision to stay, to show up, to carry chairs and sweep floors and ask for nothing, to become a man who doesn't need to be forgiven to be faithful. And Matteo was becoming exactly that. There comes a moment in every journey where silence can no longer hold what the heart needs to say. Matteo had been walking carefully, choosing presence over persuasion, service over speeches. But truth, when buried too long, begins to burn through skin. Not to punish, but to release. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He knew it might change nothing. But he also knew that not saying it would be a deeper betrayal. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where the town moved slow and everything felt suspended in winter light. The community center was mostly empty, decorations half-hung, boxes stacked neatly by the back wall. Sophia was finishing up alone, her sleeves rolled, a pencil tucked behind her ear. Matteo stood near the doorway, watching her for a long moment before speaking. Not to interrupt, but to invite something honest. "Can we talk?" he asked. And this time, she didn't say no. They sat by the window. No barrier between them but air and time. She folded her arms, not out of defense, but to ground herself. He rested his hands on his knees. Neither smiled. There was no need. This wasn't about comfort. It was about clarity. "I left," he said, voice low, steady, "because I thought what I wanted couldn't live here." He didn't look at her when he said it, not out of shame, but out of reverence. Because truth, when spoken plainly, deserves space. "I believe success required sacrifice, and I decided you were part of that cost." He let that sentence sit between them like a confession, not to manipulate, but to own. Sophia didn't flinch. She had suspected it for years, long before he was brave enough to say it. But hearing it aloud still pressed against old bruises. It didn't reopen the wound. It named it. And that naming hurt more than she expected. Still, she didn't interrupt. She let him continue. "I thought I was building something important," he said. "And maybe I did. But none of it meant anything when I couldn't call you." He looked up, finally meeting her gaze. "There were moments I wanted to come back, but my pride kept saying, 'You don't get to ask for another chance after what you chose.'" He exhaled slowly. And it was right. She stayed silent for a long moment. The kind of pause that holds weight. When she finally spoke, her voice was even. "I didn't need you to come back and fix things." She didn't speak with bitterness, she spoke with strength. "I just needed to know that you saw what it cost." Matteo nodded, eyes wet but unashamed. "I see it now. Every day." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't poetic. It was raw. And that made it real. More real than any apology. Sophia leaned back, looking out the frosted window. "For a long time, I thought I wasn't enough for you." Her words were soft but sharp. Not ambitious enough. Not interesting enough. Not worth choosing. She turned back to him, eyes clear. "But now I know. I was never the problem. Your emptiness just needed somewhere to hide." That truth didn't crush him. It freed him. She wasn't trying to punish. She was trying to reclaim her voice. And he received it the way it was meant, as something sacred. He nodded slowly, tears finally falling. "I'm sorry I made you question your worth." They sat in the silence that followed, a silence no longer heavy but cleansing. Not everything needed to be said, but what had been said mattered. It shifted something between them, not erasing the past, but reshaping it, so it could be carried differently. "You're not the same person who left," Sophia said. It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation. "You're quieter, slower, less certain." That's not a bad thing. I had to break, he replied, voice barely above a whisper. To realize what I thought was strength was just fear in disguise. He looked at her again. No one ever held me the way you did, with both grace and accountability. And I didn't know how to receive that. So I ran. Sophia looked down, her fingers tracing the edge of her sleeve. I wasn't perfect either, she said. I expected you to read my silence, to sense my needs without me saying them. I confused love with patience, and patience with self-neglect. Her voice cracked just slightly, and I've forgiven myself for that. Matteo smiled, not because he was happy, but because her honesty humbled him. We were young, he said, trying to build a forever with hands that had never held failure before. He shook his head. I thought I had to prove myself to the world, but I didn't realize. You already saw me. That should have been enough. There was no kiss, no swelling music, no cinematic ending in that moment. Just two people, sitting in truth, seeing each other clearly for the first time in years. Not as what they were, but as who they had become. And that was more than enough. Sophia stood slowly, her eyes never leaving his. Thank you for saying it out loud, she whispered. Matteo stood too, hands by his sides, not reaching. I needed to. They stood in quiet stillness. Nothing resolved, but everything changed. A weight lifted. A wound named. The truth didn't fix everything. It didn't make them new. But it did break something that needed breaking. Pride. And in the space where pride had ruled, something else took root. Respect. Honesty. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something redemptive. That morning the bakery was filled with the scent of cinnamon rolls and pine, but Sophia barely noticed. She moved slowly, distracted, her thoughts circling like the snow outside. Matteo had opened something inside her, a drawer she'd nailed shut long ago, marked with all the things she didn't dare hope for anymore. But hope, once awakened, refuses to sleep again. It knocks, soft and persistent, and Sophia found herself listening. Matteo had kept his distance for a few days after their late-night conversation, perhaps sensing her inner battle. But even from afar, his presence echoed in every corner of her world. The way he smiled at Liam when no one watched. The quiet way he fixed the broken toy shelf without being asked. He wasn't promising the future with words. He was building trust in silence. One afternoon, she found him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, baking cookies with Liam, her grandmother's recipe. Flour covered the counter. Matteo had a smudge on his cheek. Liam laughed freely, and something inside Sophia cracked wide open. It wasn't grand gestures that redeemed a man. It was this, showing up, choosing presence over pride, becoming part of the ordinary moments. He memorized your recipe, Liam told her later. He wanted them to taste exactly like when you made them. Sophia blinked back tears. No one had tried that hard to understand her in years. She had learned to stand on her own for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be known and cared for, without asking. The townspeople began to soften too. Word spread about Matteo helping at the food drive, donating anonymously to restore the community center. He didn't seek credit, just change. And while some still looked at him with wary eyes, most began to see something unfamiliar. Humility in a man once defined by ego. A man trying to write a new chapter, line by line. Sophia walked to the square one evening and found the Christmas tree finally lit. Children danced beneath it. Elderly couples held hands. Snow drifted like grace. And near the nativity scene, Matteo stood watching silently. He hadn't seen her approach, but when he did, he smiled. Not boldly, not with certainty, but with the quiet joy of someone simply grateful to be allowed near the light again. You've changed, she said softly. He nodded. Not with pride, but with acknowledgement. I had to lose everything to see what truly matters. His voice didn't shake, but it held weight. I can't erase what I did, but I can show you every day that I'm not that man anymore. His words didn't promise redemption. They revealed it in progress. That night, Sophia lit a candle on her windowsill, a family tradition for loved ones returning home. It flickered against the frost, casting a warm halo. She hadn't realized how much she wanted to believe in his return, not just to the town, but to himself. Sometimes the heart waits even when the mind says it shouldn't, and her heart was listening again. The next morning, she found a note tucked beneath her door. It was written in Mateo's handwriting. Simple, careful. "I'll be at the community hall, building the Christmas booth, no pressure, but if you want to talk, I'll be there." He wasn't chasing her. He was inviting her. With patience, with grace. She went, not to decide anything but to see. Mateo stood inside, tools in hand, laughing with Liam and the volunteers. He looked up when she entered, and his expression shifted, not to something desperate or performative, but deeply present, like a man seeing color for the first time, like someone thankful she showed up no matter the reason. They worked side by side that day, painting signs, stringing lights, their hands brushed occasionally. Words were few, but their silence was full of meaning. A kind of healing passed between them, not rushed, not forced, just shared presence, the kind that says, "I see you, and I'm here." At one point, she stepped outside for air and found the old pastor standing nearby. "He's not the same man," he said, nodding toward the hall. "But redemption isn't a destination, it's a road walked daily." Sophia nodded, understanding now that waiting for someone to be ready was missing the point. Redemption was being willing to walk with them, step by step. The next evening, a Christmas carol night was held in the square. Mateo stayed on the edges, letting others shine. When the final song played, "O Holy Night," he turned toward Sophia, not expecting anything, just offering presence, and she, moved by the music, stepped beside him. She didn't take his hand, but she stood close enough for him to feel her trust returning. Afterward, they walked together in silence, through snow-covered streets. The town glowed with holiday warmth. "Do you believe in second chances?" he finally asked. She looked up, eyes shining. "I believe in change, in people showing up, in hearts learning to stay." And he understood. It wasn't about earning her. It was about being someone worth staying for. That night, as she tucked Liam into bed, he whispered, "Do you think he'll stay this time?" Sophia paused, then kissed his forehead. "I think he's already choosing to." Her voice was quiet, but sure. Liam smiled and drifted to sleep. And in that still moment, she knew what they were building wasn't a promise. It was something better, real, steady, present. Mateo returned to the community hall each day. He showed up for Liam's play rehearsals. He learned the names of neighbors he once ignored. He didn't try to fix the past. He simply stayed. And with every moment, the town felt a little more whole, because true redemption never announces itself. It reveals itself in the spaces where someone chooses not to leave. On Christmas Eve, Sophia stood by the window watching snow fall. Her heart no longer carried the weight of waiting. It beat with something different now, readiness. Not for a perfect ending, but for a beginning built on truth, presence, and grace. She heard footsteps behind her and didn't turn. She didn't have to. She knew it was him. Mateo stopped beside her, silent. No speeches, no pleas. Just him, present, changed, willing. And when she finally looked up, she smiled, not with certainty, but with courage. The kind of smile that says, "I see the man you're becoming. I believe in the choice you're making. And maybe, just maybe, I'm ready to choose too." The town square was bathed in soft gold as the Christmas Eve celebration unfolded under a canopy of twinkling lights. Children's laughter echoed between the snow-covered benches, while old hymns drifted from the church steps. Mateo stood at the edge of the gathering, heart pounding, eyes scanning the crowd. He hadn't spoken to Sophia since the hospital night. She'd thanked him for being there, for Liam. And that was it. No promises, no illusions, just space and silence. But tonight his heart couldn't take another Christmas without truth. Sophia felt his presence before she saw him. It was like the air shifted, her chest tightening in quiet anticipation. She turned slowly, breath catching when their eyes met. Mateo didn't move. He waited, honoring the pause, honoring her choice. In that brief moment, surrounded by people and music and December light. It was as if the world faded into background noise. She didn't smile, didn't cry, just looked into the eyes of the man who had once left her and now stood before her, not asking to return but waiting to be seen. He walked toward her slowly, his hands open, nothing rehearsed. "I don't expect anything," he said, voice low but sure. "I just needed you to know. I see what I ran from, and I regret every day I didn't stay to see it bloom." Sophia's throat ached with the weight of every memory, his betrayal, her pain, Liam's laughter, the moments they almost healed. But it wasn't pain that filled her now. It was presence. This version of Mateo wasn't a promise. He was a man undone by truth. "You chose money over us," she said, the words still holding weight, even now. "You left before Christmas because you thought we'd hold you back. And I had to grow a backbone through the silence." He nodded, not defending, not flinching. "I know, and I wish I could go back and choose differently. But all I can do is stay now, not for redemption, not for reward, but because I love you, and because staying means showing up even when I'm not sure I'll be received." Sophia looked away, tears gathering. "I didn't raise Liam to believe love was earned. I raised him to believe love shows up. Always. That's what you missed." Mateo's eyes glossed. "And that's what I'm learning. Because of you. I've spent this month trying to fix what I broke. But love isn't a repair job. It's presence." "I get that now." The choir began singing Silent Night behind them. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the music hold the moment still. He took a step closer, gently. "You don't have to forgive me tonight. You don't even have to believe I've changed. But I'll be here tomorrow, and the next day, and every holiday and Tuesday and hard moment that comes after. I want to build what I destroyed, with your terms, your pace." Her heart stuttered. It would have been easier if he hadn't come back, if he hadn't changed, if he hadn't learned the exact language her soul longed to hear. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered, "even when I hated what you did, even when I swore I was done." He reached for her hand but didn't force it. She met him halfway, and in that simple, slow connection, fingers brushing, hands finding one another, it was like something broke open and rebuilt in the same breath. The crowd disappeared. The pain didn't vanish, but it softened. Love didn't erase the past. It simply stayed. The snow began to fall again, soft and slow. Around them, joy stirred in pockets, families hugging, friends laughing, candles lit. But their world had narrowed to just them. A few inches of space, decades of emotion. He smiled, not asking, just waiting. Sophia tilted her head, studying him. "You stayed," she said. "You really stayed." "I did," he replied, tears falling now. "I will." They weren't young anymore, but love had returned new. They walked to the edge of the square where the nativity scene glowed beneath fairy lights. Liam was there, playing with another child, happy, safe. Sophia watched him and then looked back at Mateo. "He asked if you'd be here tonight." I didn't know what to say. Mateo's voice caught. "If you let me, I'd like to tell him myself." She nodded. That was the beginning. Not of romance, but of trust reborn. Later, by the fire pit in front of the community center, they sat wrapped in quiet. No grand speeches, no dramatic gestures, just presence. That's what redemption looks like, she thought. Not perfect men, but men willing to learn how to stay. He gently placed his coat around her shoulders, then put his hand over hers again. Her heart didn't race like before. It steadied. Finally. The ache was still there, but it no longer screamed. It whispered, "Maybe. This is what healing feels like." "I'm scared," she said honestly. "I know," he replied. "But I'm not." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because love isn't brave when it's easy. It's brave when it stays through the storm. And I'm here for the storm. I missed every Christmas with you and Liam. But not this one, not the next." The fire cracked softly between them. Christmas wasn't a promise. It was a reminder that something broken could still shine. He asked if she wanted to dance. Right there, in the middle of the cold, on a patch of snow near the fire, they stood, slowly, clumsily, her head on his chest, his arms steady around her. The world kept moving, but for them it stood still. The pain of the past didn't dissolve. It just learned to coexist with the grace of the present. That was their miracle. People watched, smiled, and moved on. No one interrupted. Maybe everyone knew when something sacred was happening. Matteo whispered in her ear, "If you say yes, I won't propose with a ring. I'll propose with breakfast tomorrow. With showing up at Liam's games. With learning how to live small again." She smiled through tears. That's the only proposal that matters. When the dance ended, he pulled back gently. "Come home with me." She hesitated, then whispered, "You'll come home with us." He nodded. And just like that, a door reopened. Not to the past, but to a future neither had dared to imagine. One not based on dreams, but on decisions. Presence, daily choices, small kindnesses, silent strength. Back at Sophia's house, the Christmas lights blinked gently on the porch. Liam had fallen asleep, unaware that his world had shifted. Matteo carried him to bed, tucked him in, and stood watching him sleep for a long time. Sophia watched him from the doorway, and in that moment, she saw the father Liam never had finally show up. Her heart cracked, but this time it didn't break. It expanded. In the kitchen, she poured 2 mugs of cocoa. He joined her, silent, reverent. They didn't need to fill the room with words. The presence said it all. He sat beside her on the worn couch, the same one he once abandoned. Now he sat like it was sacred. His hand brushed hers again, and she didn't pull away. They sat like that for a long time, listening to the ticking clock and the wind outside. "Merry Christmas," he whispered. She smiled. "You remembered. This time I didn't forget what matters." She looked at him, really looked. "Then stay." His eyes met hers. Always. It wasn't a promise, it was a vow, carved in presence. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the fire crackled low. And somewhere between silence and forgiveness, between memory and choice, 2 hearts found their way back to something deeper than romance. They found love, the kind that chooses to stay, not just on Christmas, but every day after. The town square had never glowed quite like that Christmas Eve. Strings of golden lights reflected off the snow-covered rooftops, and the soft hum of carols drifted from every corner of the bakery. Inside, the warmth of ovens and laughter wrapped around the guests like a familiar quilt, long stored but never forgotten. But it wasn't the cinnamon or the music that made the air feel different. It was what had changed, inside them, between them, around them. Sophia stood near the window holding a cup of cocoa Liam had made. Her eyes followed the snow falling quietly on the cobbled street. Beside her, Matteo gently wrapped an arm around her waist, not with the desperation of someone afraid to lose, but with the calm presence of someone who had already chosen to stay. He didn't say much. She didn't need him to. Their silence said more than 1,000 apologies ever could. The bakery had become a place of healing, not just for Sophia and Matteo, but for the entire community that had watched them fall and rise again. What once was a place of solitude now echoed with second chances. There were still cracks in the walls and hearts that needed time, but they had chosen to mend rather than mask. Sophia, who once feared being left behind again, now found herself believing in love that doesn't run when it gets hard. Matteo had changed, but not into someone new. Rather, he had returned to himself, to the man who once dreamed, who once loved her without calculation, without fear. And in choosing to come back not with promises but with actions, he gave Sophia the only proof she ever needed, that redemption is not a story told. It is a life lived, one small choice at a time. The ring he placed in her palm that night wasn't just an engagement ring. It was the quiet echo of every day he showed up since his return, every shelf he built, every cookie he burned trying to learn her recipe, every moment he stayed even when the past came knocking loud. She looked at it not as a grand gesture but as a reflection, of presence, of humility, of permanence. It wasn't shiny. It was sincere. In the corner of the bakery, children from the shelter sang carols. Their voices, soft and imperfect, filled the space with something holy. Sophia had invited them earlier that month with no expectations, but now watching them eat gingerbread and laugh without fear, she knew this was the real miracle of Christmas. Not what's under the tree, but what is born in the heart, especially the heart that once believed it was too late. Outside, townspeople gathered around the towering Christmas tree, lighting candles one by one in honor of those who had forgiven, who had started over, who had chosen to stay. Matteo watched the crowd, tears clinging to his lashes like snowflakes. He had once stood there feeling like an outsider. Tonight he was part of it, not because he earned it, but because grace made room for those who return. Sophia stepped beside him, her gloved hand slipping into his. They stood together as the tree was lit, its glow painting their faces in gold and quiet redemption. For all their broken moments, they had arrived here not perfect, but present. Not healed, but healing. And that, they both understood now, was more than enough to build something real. People came by to hug Sophia, to clap Matteo on the back. There was no dramatic speech, no confetti or announcement, just quiet nods of recognition and smiles that said, "We see you. We're glad you came back." The town didn't need Matteo to be flawless, just honest. And this time, he was ready to let them see the whole of him, even the parts still learning to stay. Later that night, as the bakery emptied and candles burned low, Sophia found Matteo cleaning the last of the flour-dusted counters. She watched him from the doorway, a peace washing over her that had nothing to do with perfection. He turned, startled, and smiled that boyish smile that once undid her. But now it did something deeper. It reminded her of home, the kind built on presence, not fantasy. He walked toward her slowly, holding her gaze as if afraid she'd vanish if he blinked. But she didn't vanish. She stepped closer. And in that still moment under the faded bakery lights, they met in a kiss neither forced nor grand. Just real, just full of history and hope, just what healing felt like when love chooses to stay. That kiss didn't promise no more storms, but it promised shared umbrellas. It didn't erase the past, but it wove it into a future that honored where they'd been. Sophia pulled back, her forehead resting against his. "This time," she whispered, "don't just love me. Live with me. In the quiet, in the staying." Matteo nodded, his eyes misted, not with regret, but with the weight of having been chosen again. He didn't say, "I'll never leave again." He said, "I'm here now." And in that now, 1,000 broken yesterdays finally lost their power, because she believed him, not through words, but through presence. Upstairs, her grandmother's old recipe book sat on the counter. Tomorrow they'd start baking for New Year's together, and next week the town meeting about expanding the shelter. Life wasn't waiting for them to feel perfectly ready. It was already unfolding, inviting them to walk it, not rush it, together, side by side. One imperfect, beautiful day at a time. The snow kept falling, covering the sidewalks and broken things in soft white. Christmas had not erased their mistakes. It had simply given them a reason to believe again. In forgiveness, in staying, in building from the ruins. In love that chooses to come back. And love that chooses to remain. As midnight bells rang in the distance, Sophia and Matteo lit one last candle on the windowsill. It flickered gently, as if breathing, as if whispering stories only the heart could understand. Outside, the world was quiet. Still, but inside the little bakery, something had finally come alive again. For all who passed that place in the years to come, the story they'd hear wouldn't be about heartbreak or regret, but about how a man came back different, how a woman found strength in staying, and how Christmas, quietly, softly, redeemed them both. Not with miracles falling from the sky, but with the kind that show up and stay. And so to anyone watching, anyone who has ever been left behind, who has waited for change or given up on return, may this story remind you, God can rewrite even what's been torn. Christmas isn't just a date, it's a doorway. And sometimes when hearts choose love again, it redeems everything.